All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I have Marty Kendall. I hope I pronounced your name right.
That's fantastic, mate.
Awesome. Cool. So I have Marty Kendall on, who has a great website called not nutrientoptimizer.com, optimizingnutrition.com. And
Indeed, yeah. Or both, yeah.
Yeah. So we had some interactions lately because we talk about similar things here and there, like satiety and how you can control your nutrition without necessarily counting everything. So could you just tell the listeners, Marty, what inspired you to start this website and what is the main focus of your writing here?
Yeah, I suppose about 4 years ago, I started just trying to understand being married to a type 1 diabetic. My wife, Monica's had type 1 diabetes for 30 years. So through pregnancies and just trying to understand how to manage her diabetes, like yourself, I delved into the low carb world and trying to understand insulin and how to manage that, and started to quantify that with the insulin index, and then started to dig a little bit further into that and realized that everything that minimized and stabilized blood sugars was very high fat and poor nutrient density. So I dived into nutrient density, and then I suppose then with that is satiety and how you manage satiety to sort of create an overall systematized approach to nutrition. Being a civil engineer by day, I just, enchanted by the idea of trying to devise a system that says, hey, this person in this situation should try and focus on these foods and prioritize that, versus somebody else who's in a totally different situation might want to prioritize different foods. So that's been sort of my quest over the last 4 years, and just sharing and blogging. And it's been a really fascinating journey. Met a lot of amazing people and learned a lot of things. And it's great to be able to chat to you today.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fascinating. So yeah, we can get into some of the things that you just mentioned. So first of all, how did this journey influence your wife's story with diabetes? How did that go?
Yeah, really well, actually. Like, she's gone from about 60 units a day and then starting the low carb journey, and dropped to about 30 units a day of insulin, and then trying to dial that down, and she's on about 20 units a day. But then the whole life improvement has been massive to be able to control her blood sugars, and I had phenomenal improvements in that, in her whole quality of life and her energy that she's able to bring to life as a wife and as a mother and as a parent, and getting back into teaching, and she's really thriving and loving that. So it's like, wow, if these changes in nutrition can have such a fundamental impact on somebody's quality of life. And she didn't know these things for 20 years. It sort of made me angry to a point that you go, well, this information should be out there and available in the hands of people that they can use it and dial it in. But that low carb diabetes approach is not necessarily for everybody, which has been part of my learning and part of my journey as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately what gets into writing or making videos about this whole topic is always some personal struggle, which we have to overcome. So it's amazing that you had such a powerful moment that changed everything, sort of. Yeah. And as far as I saw, you yourself had a pretty significant weight loss transformation as well, right?
Yeah. I've I suppose it's been a journey through obesity. From I was up to 112 kilos and delving into keto and trying to get my ketones up, and I, recently at the lowest point with my nutrient optimizer challenge earlier in the year, I got down to 85, and as I was saying before we got on, that was probably a bit low. And over the last couple of months, I've been trying to bulk back up and gain more muscle than fat. And then, like yourself, I'm about to jump in to go, hey, how do I drop some fat while retaining that muscle without tracking every morsel? Because not everybody is able to track everything forever, and it's been a quest to say, hey, how can we dial in our nutrition to not overeat? Because obviously it wasn't, from a paleo point of view, we obviously didn't overeat in the past, and what has changed, and how do we basically reverse engineer that has been the quest.
Right. So initially that helped you to lose a lot of weight. What kind of diets did you try in the past? Like, I'm sure you've had some trial and errors, which worked better, worked worse, like for everybody, for myself as well.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of us have been listening to your journey on that low carb bent and seeing how much it improved my wife's diabetes control. I thought, hey, this must be the holy grail for everybody, and jumped on that. And then the whole keto thing came out about 4 years ago, and everybody's trying to get the ketones up, and you read, hey, just eat the butter and peanut butter and cream, and it's like, oh, this is really yummy. I'm going to keep trying to get my ketones higher and higher, and then all of a sudden you look in the mirror and go, wow, this is not working for me. There must be something wrong. And and then I suppose before that, I was really fascinated by Rob Wolf and paleo, and so I come from that sort of headspace as well. And then Matt Lalonde, I don't know whether you came across him, a mate of Rob Wolf's, was all into the nutrient density. So I suppose it's been a journey to smash all those things together with a bit of a multi-criteria analysis sort of approach to say, well, how do we dial it in and optimize it for different goals?
Right. So let's talk about this a little bit. So, or not just a little bit, actually. Let's talk about this. So, I guess there are two concepts that we're juggling here. So there is satiety, and then there is nutrient density. So let's talk a bit about each of those, and then let's try to connect them. So, how would you define satiety of foods when you're looking at this question? Like, how would you explain to someone satiety?
Yeah, I suppose satiety is a food that will make you feel full, and in the shorter term, and over the longer term, a satiating food is going to be one that you're not going to be hungry for a while. So yeah, something that'll fill you up and make you not think about food for longer. So if you're trying to diet and lean out, then it's more ideal for that sort of a goal.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There is satiety for once, right? Like, what is it that's gonna make you full acutely? And then there is also the satiation, like how long is the food gonna keep you full? So what are the factors in your research? I mean, obviously I talked about this a lot, but I'm curious your findings. Like, what are the things that you found to be the determinant factors of satiety for the most part?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to listen to your course and on intuitive eating, and listen to you talk about the different foods that work for you. And I go, yeah, they're really similar sort of learnings that I've had. And I suppose being an engineer, I'm always wanting to quantify things, maybe too much, but once you've quantified it, you can sort of dial it back in. But initially, we were playing with energy density, which is a big deal, and there was there's been a number of investigations where people find that foods that have a lower energy density tend to be more satiating and fill you up, but at the same time they might not maintain that satiation for a very long time, like your veggies and your you talk about the carrots and the cucumbers, and they'll fill you up physically, but they may not make you stay full for a longer time. So and generally nutrient dense foods tend to be more satiating, but we recently, about a year ago, my nutrient optimizer partner Alex stumbled across this database of 500,000 days of MyFitnessPal data from, I think it was 10,000 people that have been tracking their food for more than 2 months. So we downloaded that and started diving into it to try and sort of quantify the different factors that influence satiety. So out of the MyFitnessPal data, you've got protein, energy density, fiber, fat, sugar, starch, and sodium. So, interestingly, getting enough sodium tends to be satiating. So if you've got too little sodium, your body sort of craves more sodium, and there's sort of definitely a sodium hunger there. And I think to an extent, there's sort of a nutrient leverage hypothesis where people crave more nutrients, and that they'll go out of the way until they get those nutrients they need. But from a macronutrient point of view, protein is definitely a major factor that everybody sort of talks about. Fiber is definitely a factor that you have more fiber. Foods tend to be more satiating. And then where it gets a little bit confusing is the previous data looked at saying, well, is it carbs, is it fat that's more satiating one versus the other? And people think of it as sort of a linear relationship where, you need to be low carb or high carb or low fat or high fat or whatever it is. But it seems to be the combination of carbs and fat, or non-fiber carbs and fat, particularly starch and fat together, that drive appetite and hunger that is sort of like from a seasonal point of view, think, foods that are available in autumn that trigger the body to think winter is coming and you need more energy, more fat to survive the coming winter. So it's sort of from an evolutionary instinctual paleo perspective, there seems to be something going on there that triggers your body to go, hey, you need more energy to survive the coming winter. But if you can reverse engineer that to be either, very, on one end, very low fat foods are very, very hard to overeat. And on the other end, lower carbohydrate diets are harder to overconsume, maybe between 20 and 30% carbs. But once you go very, very low carb, people tend to go very high fat, and that fat to satiety is not really a thing. It's, once you separate protein and fat, that refined fat, that, bulletproof coffee or just chugging MCT oil on a calorie for calorie basis is not satiating. So, we developed a quantitative relationship between all those factors with protein, fiber, starch, energy density, and fat. So then we can quantify for each different food how satiating that it is likely to be. And so you can rank that to say, which foods are going to be more satiating than another. It's not necessarily only the high protein foods. It might be a low energy density food or a very low fat food, but there's all those different factors interact, and it can be a little bit complex, but that's why it's handy to be able to quantify those things. We're pretty excited that you've to develop that satiety index that really aligns nicely back with previous work that was done by Susanna Holtz in 1995 at University of Sydney, where they, I'm sure you're aware of the study where they did the laboratory testing on satiety and found very similar things, but that was only with 38 data points, and this is with 500,000 data points that we can really dig into that and refine that understanding.
Yeah, it's a lot of cool points of discussion here. But first, let's start with that satiety index, because one thing I find interesting on that one is there are some foods that just don't make as much sense to me why they score so well on that list. And I think in some instances, it just has to do with the difference between a laboratory setting and real life setting. So, for example, white potatoes were the most satiating food on that list. And I think that it is because when you give that to someone in a lab setting, then it is only so much of that potato you're going to eat in one sitting without anything else to accompany it, because it just gets bland and just so unsatisfying after a certain point. Like, it just makes you suffocate sort of, and you just want to stop eating it. But in a mixed dish, for example, I mean, if you have a nice steak, for example, with veggies or a big salad, that is going to be a lot more satiating, acutely at least, than if you were to eat it with potatoes, especially if you put some salt and ketchup on those potatoes or something, or they are nicely grilled in, like, even microwaved. So where do you, I mean, obviously palatability has to factor into all of this as well, right?
Yeah, you've definitely got a factor of sensory specific satiety, where if you've got one bland food that that's all you've got to eat, then your body goes, no, it's, I'm done with that. I need another flavor. And I think your body in some ways pursues other nutrients that are dictated and indicated by the flavors of the food. But at the same time, it was interesting, the white potato was cooked and cooled. So from a resistant starch point of view, you've probably got a higher resistant starch, so you've got more fiber. And if they're cold potatoes, and they're very low fat, so I think starch by itself with low fat, like, think of trying to eat even like, think Give mentioned, like trying to chug a whole pile of sugar, or if you just eat a whole pile of rice, or just those really high carb, very low fat foods are very hard to overeat. We don't eat very, very high carbohydrate, low fat foods by themselves. We tend to mix them together. And if you take that potato, bake it in oil, throw some salt on it, and you can't stop. And it's basically a potato chip. And that combination of fat and carbs together is your ultimate hyperpalatable combination of when you combine the fat and starch together in a way that just doesn't occur in nature, because we get starchy foods in like summer and late or early autumn, and then the fat foods are things we resort to in winter when we can't get the carbohydrates. So we don't in nature get those starches and fats together.
Yeah. Okay. So since you already mentioned it, let's talk a bit about carbs and fats. So I remember this chart from your website that shows the kind of the points at which higher satiety starts to kick in with like really high carb and low fat diets, and how it's just tough to overeat really high carb diets without a lot of fat to accompany it. So it's almost like a choose your own adventure type of story. Like you can go the high fat route, but then you have to cut out carbs a little bit more, or vice versa. In your personal experience, and also just from the research that you've done, which one did you find to be more satiating for people? Is it the more higher fat, lower carb route, or the other one where you eat a lot of carbs and not so much fat?
I think the answer is going to be that the very, very low fat. Like if you're thinking, well, I'm just going to eat broccoli and white rice and plain potatoes, you're not going to get through many calories by doing that, just because the energy density is so incredibly low and the palatability is so very low as well. Yeah, but I think in nature we tend to oscillate between the extremes of that low fat and the low carb. Yeah, so technically I think the data indicates that a very, very low fat approach is going to be more satiating, but whether that's the most nutrient dense and whether you get adequate protein, and if you're a bodybuilder, whether you're going to get enough to recover and rebuild your muscles, it may not be ideal at that point. So I suppose that's whether ultimately it leads you to, if you're trying to cut aggressively, then you need to get enough protein without the energy from the fat and carbs is where that leads you in the long term.
Yeah, in my experience, I think that the high fat, lower carb diet can be really good for like long term maintenance sort of thing, or it's more conducive to a lifestyle, I think, because you can even go out and have some high fat, lower carb meals. You can order some different side dish in a restaurant, but lower fat diets are really hard to maintain for the long term. But for short term aggressive cutting, low fat, I think for many people is very successful. It's not really maintainable in the long term, or it is maintainable, of course, but it just requires a lot of lifestyle tweaking. And also, if you want to maintain like a really low body fat percentage in the long term, then it's also, I think, easier to accomplish with a higher carb, lower fat approach, simply because of the volume of food, which gives you that acute satiety at all times. And yeah, when you're going the high fat route, I think it is doable, but you're always sort of walking a tightrope simply because the foods you're eating are so energy dense. And I guess that's also where a lot of people run into problems with keto approaches. Yeah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose on a high carb, low fat approach, there's plenty of skinny vegans out there that, successfully lose a lot of weight, but whether their body composition is what the people listening to this podcast generally want, maybe it is, but you definitely can lose weight on a very disciplined, plant only, low fat diet. As a family, we tend to go for that lower carb type approach, with Monty being a diabetic. And I suppose I try to prioritize protein where I can, with nutrient density thrown in, just because I know that, that fat is very easy to overeat. And I'm still on my weight loss body recomp journey, similar to what you are.
Yeah, so let's talk for a second about this concept of eating carbs and fats together, because this is something that is interesting, because this is one of those concepts that made a comeback over recent times, because traditionally it was a very much bro sciencey thing to say that don't eat carbs and fats together. And now, of course, that myth was dispelled that, well, as long as calories are controlled, it's not an issue if you eat carbs and fats together. But now, just with many things, just like in the case of clean eating, yes, you don't need to eat clean to lose fat or to maintain a lower body fat percentage, but practically it makes sense, because if you're eating really clean, quote unquote, nutritious foods, then it is just hard to get in a ton of calories. And the same applies for fats and carbs. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to store more fat on a per calorie basis if you're mixing them, but in a practical sense, it is just a lot easier to overeat them when you're mixing them, right? So this was another big focus of yours.
Yeah. Well, I did a post, Don't Eat for Winter, which was inspired by Sian Foley from Ireland. He's been into this whole seasonal eating aspect, but I did an analysis of foods that have greater than 30% carbs, greater than 30% fat, and less than 20% protein. And there's no natural foods in that other than acorns and breast milk, which are both sort of in nature designed to fatten people up. Everything else is Oreos and chips and chocolate and milk chocolate, and basically it's the formula for junk food. So yeah, sure, you can lose weight if you're able to, on a Twinkie diet or a junk food diet, and if it fits your macros, if you can maintain that. But the amount of discipline you're going to need to maintain a calorie deficit when your fat and carb as a percentage is similar with a lower protein is just going to be incredibly difficult, and you're going to have to weigh and measure everything you eat if you're going to maintain that calorie deficit. So if you want to not be doing your head in all the time, trying to restrict and just be completely consumed with food, you need to find a way that's going to help you sustain that calorie deficit without a whole lot of mental energy constantly. My experience is you just can't continue that calorie deficit long term if the food you're eating signals that you need to eat more, and there's something about those foods that just say it's time to eat more. But when you can avoid that danger zone, it's so much easier to maintain a normal eating pattern.
Yeah, it's interesting, the eating for winter thing. This is one thing that we always mention, that our brains are sort of still stuck in like caveman times when food was really scarce, and people are almost like scoff at that, like, yeah, sure, it's one of those cliches that people tend to rehash, but it is a really underrated concept. Like, just lately, I've been watching clips from this series Planet Earth from the BBC documentary, and it's absolutely fascinating. By the way, if anybody haven't seen that, check that scene when the snakes are chasing the iguana. Is the most fascinating scene you've ever seen. It is just incredible. I watched it like 20 times in the past few days. Yeah, but so there you see animals that, like polar bears, for example, that literally don't eat for a couple of months, and then they see a seal, and then it's okay, either I get this seal right now or no food for another 3 weeks. Like, and that's the environment that we came from. So our brains are really wired to seek foods that are getting us the most amount of calories in the least amount of time and with the least effort. So it is really totally makes sense that really carb and fat rich foods that were really hard to find in nature are just so appealing to us. Like, this is what Stephan Guyenet's work is about in large part. And actually an interesting thing is, I talked about this, I think one time, that nut butters, like peanut butter, almond butter, this is one of the really common binge foods amongst people that are already into the healthy lifestyle, that don't eat pizza and ice cream anymore. And if you think about it, it makes total sense, because it basically has everything that you would need on an island if you were to stuck there. It has protein, it has a lot of fat, it has some carbs. Like, you could basically survive on that stuff for forever, basically. Yeah, it is really crazy.
Yeah. I'm a sucker for peanut butter, and then you throw the cream in with it as well, and or full fat Greek yogurt, and it's like, oh, this is the bomb. I could eat this all day. And you just, where'd the jar of peanut butter go? And you have to, like you've said yourself, you have to find a way to restrict those foods in your life because you don't have an off switch for it. And yeah, I think you look at bears in nature and different animals that go into sort of a hibernation. They just respond to their signals that nature says you need to get really fat now to survive, and then spring comes around and you don't need that fat, and what's available, it's lean fish and lean things, and there's no berries and there's not as much starch around, so those bears lean out really quickly after winter. And we're not hibernating bears, but I think to some degree we're very much still connected to nature, and those oscillations in not just the seasons, but the seasons that we put in our mouth that sort of indicate what's coming up, really dictate our appetite. And I think you look at what's been booming and going off in our food system over the last 50 years. We've basically, in 1931 they got the Nobel Prize for learning how to create fertilizers from fossil fuels, and that's just enabled us to double our food production over the last half a century. And we can make all this starch and vegetable oils that basically comprise most of our food calories these days. It's a massive amount of our calories are starches from grains, rice and corn, along with oils from soy and corn that then we smash together and combine and put colorings and flavorings and make it look and taste nutrient dense. But it's just this amazing, hyper palatable, I call it supra autumnal food that says, hey, it's time to binge now because winter's coming. And I think it's that sort of concept is central to the obesity epidemic, that we've been able to manufacture these hyper palatable foods that are cheap and we love eating them, but they're not good for our health.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting with the nutrient density because this is something that I've seen some people go back and forth on. Like some people say that it's not really how it's working, but I think there can be a practical or a compelling argument to be made for this, that perhaps our bodies have some sort of a sensory mechanism that is looking for nutrients in foods, and it sort of has an incentive, like sort of a nutrient leverage theory, you could call it. Like basically we have an incentive to consume foods until we got a sufficient amount of certain nutrients. Are you thinking along those lines, or how do you think about nutrient density?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the protein leverage hypothesis, and there seems to be a fairly strong relationship that humans eat until they get enough protein, and it's hard to eat really high protein foods beyond that. Our body sort of switches off and says, well, I can't convert that protein to energy very easily. I have to go through, 25% thermic effect of food losses. Can you give me some fat or carbs, thanks, and I've had enough protein, and if you're just going to feed me protein, I don't want any more. And I think, like I mentioned before, we saw a similar sort of thing with the salt in the MyFitnessPal. Once we get about 4 or 5 grams of salt per day or per 2,000 calories, the body says, I've had enough, and you get a decrease in appetite and satiety improves. And I think to some degree, you're going to get that across the full spectrum of micronutrients, and we don't really have enough data to indicate that. But with the nutrient optimizer, just rolling that out more and more and more lately, and just seeing when people prioritize those harder to find nutrients in their diet, they're just going, oh, I'm not hungry anymore, and I feel energetic, and I'm not depressed anymore. And it's just really cool to see what happens when people try to fill their diet with the micronutrients that they need from their diet. I suppose it goes into that clean eating, if it fits your macros thing. But I think there's a real major factor there, especially with older people who may have some nutrient deficiencies or have been eating a really poor diet for a very long time. Once they get those harder to find nutrients, the cravings seem to shut down. And at the same time, foods that have very high nutrient density tend to be higher protein, higher fiber. The whole satiety index quantification and nutrient density quantification very much align with each other. So they sort of confirm each other. So once you emphasize and prioritize either or both together, you get a very satiating diet that's incredibly hard to overeat. And, you get to a point where you probably need to increase your energy density because you're losing so much weight in the long term. But in the short term, it's just an amazing hack to lose weight without hunger.
Yeah, and I guess it is also convenient that the foods that tend to be really nutrient dense, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but the foods that have a really good profile of macronutrients are scoring pretty highly on the satiety index generally, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's those green veggies and the offal and the seafood, lobster and the like, that are just incredibly nutrient dense and satiating at the same time. And I've got this chart of satiety versus nutrient density, and on the bottom left corner, it's all the hyperpalatable grain plus vegetable oil products that dominate our food system these days, that are both nutrient poor and have a very poor satiety score as well. So, if you want to improve your diet, you just cut those out. And I basically say, treat anything that has any starch plus vegetable oil listed on the label, treat it as a recreational drug, and you'll improve your diet markedly overnight.
Right. Yeah, actually, just to backtrack on something you mentioned before. So let's talk about protein just for a second. So I think many people that will listen to this will be familiar with the concept that protein seems to be more satiating up to a point than carbs or fats. And then maybe more recently, some people are familiar with protein leverage theory. So yeah, like what have you found in terms of protein intake? Like, have you found the sweet spots? Like there's an amount that we should get in, and beyond that, it seems to be no longer more satiating. What is your experience here?
Yeah, the satiety analysis stuff sort of indicates that 35, 40, 45%. Most people can't eat beyond that, but it does start to plateau out a little bit at that point. But that's really high compared to what most people eat. I think the average is around 13 to 16%. So most people are a very, very long way from that. And I suppose that if you push your protein super high, if you're just living on protein powders, your nutrient density isn't going to be fantastic. But if you're prioritizing protein from whole food, you're going to be in a pretty good position. And then if you throw in some non-starchy veggies for your electrolytes, which tend to be more contained in those plant-based foods or the seafood, then you're going to be in a good position. I know some other people say, I know Menno sort of focuses on protein as only satiating to a point, but the satiety analysis of all that data indicates that it basically continues to a fairly high level.
Yeah. The only thing I found with super high, so some people may know that I did a carnivore diet experiment about a year ago, and I stayed on it in total for like maybe 2 months. And what I found is really, really high protein intakes are a really good way of basically never feeling hungry, but also a good way to feel like death at certain points. Like I sort of got to the point where I was like not hungry, but just like almost like I ran out of energy, literally. And pretty much no matter how much extra protein I ate, I just still had trouble getting up from one couch and sitting down to the other couch, literally. And what's also interesting is that mentally,
even with adequate fat.
That's the thing. So at that time I was trying to cut still, and I was trying to keep my fat lower and my protein higher. So that is the thing. Like, I think low carb, like very low carb, higher protein, higher fat diets can work, but they tend to work best when you're not trying to cut, and especially not cut aggressively, because then you can sort of eat fats more liberally. And then you actually get to that point where you're feeling really satiated and you almost lose interest in foods, especially because these diets, like a carnivore diet, tends to be more like not really bland, but more like monotonous in terms of taste profile.
You definitely get a sensory specific satiety kicking in. I suppose that I think what you're going to find there is that the protein is just really hard to convert to energy. You can go through gluconeogenesis to convert your protein to glucose, to ATP, but it's really labor intensive. You lose 25% of that energy from protein in that conversion, and your body just says, wow, dude, I don't want to keep doing that. And that's why it's so satiating, because your body only needs so much protein, and once you hit that protein ceiling, it just goes, wow, if that's all you're going to give me to eat, I don't want any more of it. Yeah,
it's and also there is some evidence that protein actually or food in general interacts with some of the chemicals in our brains that are responsible for mood regulation. And I some people anecdotally reported, and I can relate to this, that really high protein intakes can kind of make you feel lethargic. For some people, it can make them more motivated and more anxious sometimes. I just found that it just made me sort of sucked out emotions from my brain. Like I remember these times when I was with my girlfriend and I just felt like just couldn't relate to her emotionally. And then it was like, what the hell is wrong with me? It was so strange. Yeah.
I've done some analysis of the carnivore diet and Sean Baker's diet and looked at the nutrient profile. And I think it works really well for a lot of people who have got really messed up gut and autoimmune condition. It's basically the ultimate elimination diet, but whether it's the optimal, most nutrient dense diet for everybody, I'm not sure. I think that's sort of somewhere on the spectrum between fully plant-based and fully animal-based that is more optimal for most people. And, there's all different passionate views within that and on that spectrum. But, sure, if it works for you. But if it doesn't, then try to find foods that do work for you, that don't irritate your gut. And, but if you've got massive autoimmune issues, then it might be an amazing magic elimination diet that a lot of people find it to be.
Right. So I would be interested in, based on your research and also based on personal experience, like if you could, I mean, it's cool that you mentioned on your website that you don't necessarily have to follow any type of specific diet to have a really nutrient-dense diet. So whether you're following a vegan diet or carnivore diet or whatever it may be, you can tweak it to be a lot more healthful. But if you could give like a baseline diet to someone, if someone came to you, it's like, hey, what should I eat? Like what would you say? Like if like whatever top X amount of foods that you should have in your diet or types of foods, what would you say?
Yeah, we say your diet doesn't really need a name. It doesn't need to be called keto or vegan or whatever. If you're prioritizing nutrient density, you don't need it to have an identity and a name. You can just move on to optimizing it. But you need adequate protein, and you're going to need some minerals, which you can get from the green leafy vegetables or seafood as well, in addition to the beef. Beef is a great source of protein, but it's a favorite of a lot of people, but it doesn't always add a full spectrum of nutrient density, and most people aren't eating the liver and the connective tissue. I mean, seafood is amazing. I eat a lot of mackerel or sardines. Eggs are incredible. From a plant kingdom point of view, you've got the spinach and mushrooms and a whole variety of nutrient dense green veggies. I think you can take that too far. You can, I don't think we're meant to live on spinach alone or spinach shapes blended up, but it's just a nice variety of all those different foods will give you a good nutrient profile. It's interesting to see when you do the analysis of people's diets from different angles and different ends of the plant-based versus animal-based, you see the recommended foods tend to bring them back towards that balance. And some people have got a very short list of animal foods recommended to them, while they've got this massive list of vegetables that they can prioritize. So it depends on what your current context is as to what foods contain the nutrients you're currently not getting. So it's always very contextually dependent. But the things you need to eliminate are basically those, starch plus vegetable oil foods that are flavored and colored to look like they contain nutrients, but they don't.
Absolutely. I'm interested, since you mentioned that you were on a muscle building phase recently, I'm curious what you found to be good food choices for yourself during that time, whether you had any kind of trial and error period in the beginning when you were like trying to eat more calorie dense foods maybe, and it was like, okay, this is a little bit too calorie dense, a bit too tasty for my own good, if you had anything like that. I'm curious how that went.
Yeah. I so identify with your journey and listening to it. And you said, with bulking, you just need to allow yourself to eat because your body, after all that volume, just goes, give me food now. So I was giving myself leeway to reach for the peanut butter and the yogurt and all this sort of energy dense, maybe even the honey or whatever, just to get the calories in to recover from high volume training. And my body just, was really screaming out for that energy dense food, the protein shakes, the protein powder, and because you're getting so much calories in, it doesn't have to be as nutrient dense. So you're just getting a whole lot of total quantity of nutrients because your diet doesn't have to be as nutrient dense because you're getting so much total energy in. But if you're trying to diet down, that's where it becomes much more important to prioritize the nutrient density, both for satiety and to make sure you're getting enough nutrients. And, Lyle McDonald talks about with the protein sparing modified fast, there's previous versions of the protein sparing modified fast where people actually died because they didn't get enough nutrients into their diet on a calorie deficit if the fake foods are involved.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm interested to hear about your nutrient density challenge. What is that about, and what sort of results have you seen so far there?
Yeah, we did a challenge to launch the Nutrient Optimizer, which is like a tool that helps you dial in your macros and micros and helps you with a whole range of habits as well. We did a challenge in January to launch it, starting 2nd of January, and that focused on nutrient density as the backbone, but we had cash prizes for weight loss and blood sugar improvement because, diabetes is a bit of a special passion of mine. And it was really nice to see, as I said before, people, as they prioritize nutrient density, they thought, I want to lose weight, and they all got enchanted by chasing green in chronometer and increasing their micronutrient density, and then went, I'm not hungry, I feel good, and I'm losing weight, and you saw the ketones come up and then drop back down to baseline and sort of went away. So ketones were not a big deal at all, and their blood sugars dropped nice and quickly, and a lot of them lost a lot of weight really quickly. The average weight loss was 0.75% per week, or 5% on average. Some the winner lost 18% in 6 weeks, which was quite incredible. And we've got another one coming up starting the 22nd of April, so in a week, to just focus on nutrient density, because we said, hey, a lot of things happen when people just say, I'm going to maximize the nutrient density of my diet. All those good things with energy levels and weight loss seem to follow behind that. So we figured, hey, we'll just get people, train them up to prioritize nutrient density. We've put a lot of work into developing both the optimizer, which is a tool that plugs into chronometer that tells you what you need to eat and helps you dial in your macros if you're tracking. But we've also got a 6-part boot camp manual that sort of guides you through the process of, tracking your baseline diet, and then adding in new foods and meals, and then planning ahead, and then tracking that final week, which will sort of be a competition. And then hopefully from there, once you've got that training on board, then you'll be much more in tune with your intuitive eating. And I suppose that's a passion of mine, that I don't want to be tracking everything and trying to micromanage calories for the rest of my life. I want to be, eating foods that I know will help me reach my goals, that I know are nutritious and will be satiating when I need them to be, and I can manipulate that when I need to be bulking and whatever. So yeah, that goes from 22nd of April to the 19th of May, 4 weeks that will sort of guide people through to help them to optimize the nutrient density of their diet, and then lots of other things will probably happen along with that. So we've got about 250 people signed up for that, and we had about 950 sign up for the last one that will probably come through. A lot of those have come through as well. So yeah, it's looking really good.
That is awesome. And actually what I like about this whole approach is that, and this is actually something I also emphasize in my autoregulatory eating course, is that like whenever possible, think about adding things to your diet as opposed to subtracting things. And it seems like a minor difference. Like, okay, I'm going to focus on optimizing the nutrients per calorie in my diet. It seems like a minor difference, but it really influences how your outlook is about your entire diet. Because when you're thinking about, okay, I need to eat less, I need to take out this, take out that, it really puts you into this scarcity mindset. And it's a completely different experience when you're thinking about, okay, how can I improve this thing by adding more things to it? And it accomplishes the same goal, but the experience you will have along the journey is completely different. So I really like this approach. Yeah.
Food shouldn't be about guilt and deprivation. Food should be good and a celebration. And we want to say, let's focus on optimal foods and foods that are going to help you reach your goal, not, always being guilty and go, I feel cravings. And, you feel cravings, you feel like binging because you're not giving your body what it actually needs. And if you prioritize giving your body what it actually needs, then you won't have those cravings and binge episodes. And, it's just we need to turn the dietary world around into focusing on, hey, let's give your body what it actually needs, rather than always going, if you just count calories, if you just, limit calories. Yeah, if you can limit calories forever, then you'll lose weight, but will you feel good? Will you have good body composition? Will you, not be depressed? If you get the nutrients you need in your diet, then so many other good things happen.
Awesome. Cool. So Marty, is there something I definitely should have asked you and I didn't?
Oh, it's been a really fun chat, man. I've really enjoyed everything you're doing, and definitely think we're on the same track. And I hope we can continue to work together to help people to, have a sustainable, healthy, vibrant life. Over the long term, not just a short term deprivation diet.
Awesome. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so everybody, if you're interested in optimizing your the nutrient density of your diet and managing your nutrition without counting calories and just thinking about or how you can reduce certain elements of your diet and how you can take out things, then definitely check out optimizingnutrition.com and the Nutrient Optimizer of Marty. You can also check out my autoregulatory eating course, of course.
Which is very good. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I really appreciate you saying that.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, and so yeah, everybody give these things a look. And yeah, Marty, I just mentioned your resources, but any other place where people can find you?
I've a bunch of Facebook groups. So if you look for Nutrient Optimizer or Optimizing Nutrition, great communities of people there on Facebook, and it's really been exciting to develop this hive mind of friends and community that are all sort of on that same journey to help people, because we all have this massive amount of knowledge and theory, but it's working with each other to continue to support each other is where it's really at, and to bridge that knowledge action gap to help people to actually put it into practice every day. And the really exciting places online, and I think exciting things happening in the future in the nutrition community through what is happening online.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for mentioning that. I forgot about the Facebook group. Yeah, you have a cool community there. So yeah, definitely check that out, everyone. So yeah, Marty, thank you so much for being on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Definitely. Really fun. Thank you.